You returned, didn't you? You always do. The voice does not rise, does not fall. It slithers through the dust of time as if spoken not with breath, but with the memory of breath. You sit. You do not know when you sat. The candle before you flickers, though the room holds no wind. Around you stones, ancient, moist, patient, cradle silence like a relic, and somewhere beneath the world, beneath Berlin's cracked bones, the page waits. You who listen in darkness, who light a candle against the rot, you are marked, not cursed. No, not yet, but marked. So, whisper your place in the dust below, the hour your shadow stirs most often, and the darkness may not notice you, not tonight. The monk sighs. It is the kind of sigh that empties centuries from the chest. You feel his eyes, though he no longer owns them. And when he speaks again, the words are no longer greeting. They are memory, or worse, prophecy. The last time I held the Codex, it wept oil and ash. Its breath was iron, its teeth bound in pages. And the boy who brought it, he never blinked again. 1942, yes. Under the jackboots and gaslight, under the eagle's stare. They found it there, in the Reichsarchive, locked in a drawer beneath plans for a 1,000-year empire, and yet it was older, far older, than any nation. His voice lowers, if such a thing were still possible. They called it Codex Saculum Obscurum, the Codex of the Dark Age. But that is not its name, not its true name. That name is not spoken. It is carved into bone, into time. Your breath falters. A page turns, not by hand. Now, let us turn the first page. Berlin, 1942. The heart of winter. Deep beneath the war, beyond even the sounds of bombs and boots, a secret chamber quakes in silence. The chamber is made not by Nazis, but inherited by them. A remnant of the Prussian Thule Society, swallowed into Himmler's occult cabinet. And within this chamber, among fractured reliquaries and boxes marked Nicht öffnen, lies the Codex, no larger than a child's hymn book, wrapped in coarse leather that seems to move when stared at too long. It was the archivist Krauss who first reported the glow. Not light, but an anti-light, a pulling, not a shining. He told his superior he thought it was a chemical reaction. He told himself it was the after-image of fatigue. But when he reached toward the cover, his fingers recoiled. Not from heat, from memory. Something ancient and unsummoned slid into his nerves, and he whispered, "Dies ist nicht für Augen." This is not for eyes. The Codex's discovery never reached Hitler, nor did it reach Himmler. No, it was intercepted by Oberführer Weiss, a man of particular leanings. He believed in Blut und Boden, yes, but also in Runen und Schatten, blood and soil, runes and shadow. He had once dined with a Tibetan monk and drank what he believed was dragon's marrow. He had dreams of an empire beyond the veil, a Reich not of man, but of the Übergeist, the Overspirit. Weiss had the book transferred to a secondary facility, beneath Potsdam, a bunker within a bunker. There the experiments began. One ritual, described only briefly in a torn letter found post-war, involved a mirror of polished obsidian, a circle of elder ash, and the recitation of syllables that did not belong to any known language. This ritual, Weiss believed, would allow the Reichserbe, the spiritual heir of Germany, to speak backward into time. What they received instead was silence, then teeth, then ink pouring from every wall seam, forming a single sentence. Du bist nicht zuerst. You are not the first. The monk pauses, not from exhaustion, from reverence. Even now, decades later, the memory of those words shifts in his throat like shards of bone. There was one survivor from that first test, a young conscript named Elias. He had been assigned as a guard, but entered the ritual chamber during the reading. He emerged blind, but laughing. When interrogated, he would only repeat one phrase over and over. The book is a lung. It breathes you back. This phrase puzzled scholars after the war. Was it metaphor? Was Elias mad? Or was he correct? Had the Codex drawn air from him, not to feed itself, but to echo him, to speak him? One obscure file, stamped SS Ebene, verboten, mentions an earlier mention of such a codex in the Chronic von Wiblingen, 1479, hidden within a Jesuit footnote. The note references a book that breathes below the threshold, kept in the ossuary vaults of a burned-down Benedictine cloister. A sketch shows a cover almost identical to the one in 1942, though the 15th century artist shaded the pages, black not white. The monk now reaches with skeletal fingers you cannot see but feel toward that same page. You hear it turn. The sound is wet. It is only the beginning. He whispers. Breathe carefully, child. This book inhales. The page before you is no longer parchment. It is something closer to skin, stretched tight and graying at the edges, veins faintly visible beneath a translucent membrane. The ink has bled into its fibers like decay soaking bone. The monk's whisper trembles now, but not with fear, with awe. You asked what the cover was made of, did you not? Not calf, not lamb, not even the skin of sinners, as the Dominicans once warned, but skull, crushed, boiled, pressed into sheets under pressure no press could achieve. The Nazis, they thought it symbolic, but no. The binding is literal. Powdered cranial fragments, thousands mixed with resin, wick, and marrow. You flinch, but not from horror, from recognition. Somewhere inside you, a word tries to rise, ancient and unformed. The monk continues, breath like a dying flame. There is an art older than binding, older than printing, the art of sealing. You hear it in your own mind before he says it. To seal a thought, you must first kill the skull that bore it. The Codex is not simply a book, you now understand. It is a reliquary, a tomb of thoughts. And every page, every line is a borrowed voice, or worse, a stolen one. The Nazi occult division, the Ahnenerbe, recruited a woman for this discovery. Her name was Frieda Koenig, a paleographer with a background in Sumerian, fragments in Armenian grimoires. Koenig was known for her controversial theory that early human language was not invented, but heard, that it was received from a source below consciousness. Her paper was banned by Leipzig University. Himmler was intrigued. When Koenig first laid eyes on the Codex, she wept. Not from madness, from memory. She claimed she had seen it before, in a dream, in childhood, where a monk stitched pages beneath a burning sky. She recognized one of the sigils, a looped Ouroboros flanked by two kneeling figures, as identical to a carving she had studied in a 12th century Ethiopian monastery wall, known as the church built in reverse. That church, she noted, had no door, only a window that bled salt. The second night of her study, Koenig vanished. Her quarters were undisturbed, except for the smell of ash and the presence of a small, tooth-shaped shard of ivory on her bed. This fragment, upon testing decades later, was found to be not bone, none but condensed keratin and ink, the same material forming the Codex's spine. Another report, never published, claims that a fragment of her voice, just a rasp, was recorded 3 days later, emanating from an empty hallway microphone. The sound file contains a single word, whispered in what linguists could only identify as a corrupted form of Old Church Slavonic. Volkv, witch priest, the monk at your ear breathes shallowly now, as if mimicking the dust that coats the Codex. Even we, in the monastery beneath the Black Sea, we were warned not to bind thoughts without bleeding them first. They swell, child. They swell and burst. You notice something strange in the margins. The ink does not stay fixed. It shifts slightly when you don't look. It's forming faces. You blink, they're gone. Among the untranslatable diagrams is one known only by its Nazi catalog code, Schema V43 heptagram. It is a spiral of bone script resembling both Enochian characters and Indo-European root glyphs, a sigil that, when overlaid upon the human skull, maps precisely to nerve clusters associated with language comprehension. The implication is unspeakable. The Codex does not just contain forbidden words. It is a manual for implanting them. This echoes a ritual once performed by a breakaway sect of Spanish monks in the 9th century, known as the Tachifrati. These monks, excommunicated by Rome, practiced librephagia, the ingestion of ground sacred texts. They believed that swallowing pages allowed the words to inhabit them, making the monk into a vessel of prophecy. Most died within days. One lived 20 years. He wrote only one sentence before he died. I hear a tongue that gnaws me. You realize now, with a sinking horror, that every page of the Codex bears a hum beneath it, a frequency not heard but felt behind the ears, as if each letter was alive, still speaking, still binding. In the margins of page 4, scrawled in a distinctly non-Gothic hand, possibly Koenig's, possibly older, is a warning. Do not translate. To translate is to give breath. The Nazi archivists ignored this. You hear their names? Now, Hans, Muller, Droznik, Koenig. None survived. Not in form. Their minds, perhaps, still echo in the Codex, rebinding themselves every time the page is turned. Not memories, presences. The monk's voice cracks now as if reliving what he once tried to forget. We sealed it once before. We bled the ink from its bones and prayed backward through the alphabet. But still it returned. Still it found paper, found hands, a pause. Then, it has found yours now. The candle sputters, though no air moves. You blink slowly as if something thick presses against your eyes. Not blindness, no. A kind of illumination too dense for light. It creeps into the room like fog from the margins of an unclean scripture. The monk inhales sharply, and when he speaks, it is with awe wound tight around dread. We believed parchment could only bleed ink, but this one, no. The light came first. Thin. Silver. Wrong. The third page of the Codex was opened during a controlled observation on January 12, 1942. The observers were three: Weiss, the archivist Krauss, and an anonymous stenographer believed to be Czech. Records of the session are inconsistent, not because they were lost, but because each man's account contradicts the others and sometimes themselves. The light, according to Krauss, emerged like a mouth from the margin. Weiss described it as a filament, not cast, but pulling, a rope of not light attempting to tether the eye. The stenographer wrote nothing. She was later found blind, whispering Morse code through a rusted pen clutched between her teeth. None of the transcribed taps formed words in any known language, but when recorded and slowed to 1/8 speed, they formed a pattern, 7 tonal pulses repeating every 21 seconds. The same rhythm, later discovered, carved into the walls of the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, a subterranean necropolis in Malta over 6,000 years old. Coincidence is not something the Codex allows. The light that first time burned no flesh, but the shadows it left behind clung. Weiss reportedly refused to sleep for 8 nights after the opening, claiming that when he closed his eyes, the letters would rise from the page and unwrite his name. When forced into rest via injection, he awoke with third-degree burns on the insides of his eyelids. The military report lists it as autothermal hallucination response. But the monk scoffs when he whispers this phrase. No dream leaves glyphs. No madness leaves sigils in ash. On the 3rd folio of the Codex, beneath a diagram of concentric stars and a crawling serpent crowned in iron, is an inscription written in crimson lacquer. The substance used is still debated. Some claimed it was mercury resin, others powdered cinnabar mixed with bile. But one autopsy report from a later Nazi defector revealed a single shocking truth. The lacquer matched the chromatic residue of a pigment used in an 8th century Armenian Bible, one that was said to glow in darkness when read aloud. That Bible was destroyed by fire in 1897. and yet the same pigment appeared here, intact. More unsettling. The inscription shifted position when not being read. One observer noted that each time he returned to it, the glyphs would realign, as if anticipating him, or correcting his perception. Here lies one of the Codex's most disturbing features. Its content appears variable. This echoes an obscure theological theory known as scriptura mutabilis, the belief that certain sacred texts are not fixed, but fluid. The 13th century mystic Berengar of Limoges wrote in a now lost Tractatus that there are scrolls which learn from the reader's eyes, and in their reflection become new scripture. The Codex then may be such a mirror, not reflecting flesh but soul and rewriting what it finds. The monk's whisper curls like incense. You think books cannot bleed, but you forget. Paper was once skin, ink was once gall. The alphabet was once a scream. One fringe ritual, recorded in a crumbling Vatican side letter dated 1611, may relate directly to the Codex. The rite of radiant drowning was a whispered exorcism performed not on people, but on illuminated manuscripts believed to be possessed by comprehension. The rite required the submerging of the book in holy oil while reciting the book of Revelation backward, pausing at every mention of light. The result, it is said, was not the extinguishing of the book's power, but the extinguishing of nearby lanterns. All known copies of this rite were buried under the ossuary of Sant'Agostino in Rome. The ossuary has since flooded. No one dares drain it. One final observation from the 1942 experiments remains locked in a sealed envelope labeled Nur für den letzten Leser, for the last reader only. Within it, transcribed on carbon black paper, is the following entry. The light does not come from within the page. The page reflects what it sees in you. If it bleeds, it is because you are wounded. This statement has baffled scholars for decades. But the monk, he does not laugh. He simply turns the page, and for the first time, the candle dims in response. The page is colder now, isn't it? You hadn't noticed, but he's right. The chill doesn't come from the air. It seeps from the ink itself, from beneath it. The candle trembles, and so do you. The monk leans closer, his whisper thinner than parchment. You are reading what was never meant to be seen in warmth. This is a winter page, a solstice binding. The fourth page of the Codex, scribed in a darker, coarser hand, bears no words, only symbols. A single circle enclosed by 7 smaller marks, each etched with irregular strokes as if scratched in haste or frenzy. The parchment is warped, as if frozen then thawed repeatedly. Along its edge, droplets of deep brown stain the vellum like melted wax, blood perhaps, or something far older. Among the accompanying Nazi notes, one report by Sturmbannführer Dietrich Heine describes a secret gathering held on December 21st, 1941, the winter solstice. This ritual was conducted in a secluded, Alpine chapel, long abandoned by the church but repurposed by the SS Ahnenerbe for arcane experimentation. The Codex was brought there under armed escort and placed on a stone altar, chiseled with runes not found in any Nordic lexicon. The ritual was based on a fringe belief, a distortion of a pre-Christian rite, whispered about in the writings of Johannes Trithemius but never fully transcribed, the Solstitium Cruentum, the blood solstice. It was believed that on this longest night, the boundaries between time and memory weakened, allowing for offerings not just to gods, but to forgotten thoughts, entities who once were remembered and now feed on what remains. The monk murmurs, they thought sacrifice would unlock it, but sacrificing child only awakens. The SS performed the rite at midnight. 7 men, 7 cuts. Each bled into a silver basin carved with the same pattern as the page. They chanted a hybrid of corrupted Latin and a reconstructed Proto-Aryan dialect, their voices echoing against walls that did not reflect sound. Witnesses claim a fog arose, not mist, but breath, a cold breath, from beneath the Codex. One man, Lieutenant Brune, reportedly burst into flame, but no burn marks were found on his clothes, only his skin. Later analysis showed third-degree burns in geometric shapes mirroring the symbols on the page. His mouth was found filled with ash and petals of holly. He had not eaten in 2 days. An obscure historical account from 1683 might shed light on this event. In the frozen woods near Novgorod, a sect of Eastern Orthodox dissenters known as the Sviatobezumnia, the Holy Mad, celebrated a similar rite. They claimed that Christ's birth had a twin moment on the opposite solstice, a night not of life, but of forgetting. On this night, they said, blood warmed the frozen names of the dead, allowing them to speak once more through chosen vessels. The church excommunicated them. Their chapel was burned. The snow around it did not melt for 9 years. The monk's voice begins to fracture. He is not weak. He is remembering. We held the book once, in winter. The frost bled from it. Not onto our hands. No, it pulled the heat from us. One brother lost 3 fingers. The others, they heard bells in their sleep. Back in the Nazi ritual records, a chilling note emerges. After the solstice rite, those who handled the Codex developed what came to be called Rückwärtsbekenntnisse, backward confessions. These were moments of involuntary speech, recorded when subjects were asleep or sedated, in which they recited events from their own lives, but in reverse order and from the perspectives of those they had harmed. Victims of abuse speaking as their abusers. Soldiers recounting the deaths they inflicted but with the emotion of the fallen. These confessions were eerily accurate. Some included details the speaker could not possibly have known. The theological implications were unbearable. The Codex was beginning to reinvert memory, forcing its readers to become vessels for empathy through torment, a process theorized by a banned Jesuit scholar in 1724, Father Riccio of Toledo. His belief was heretical, that true judgment came not after death but within guilt, and that holy texts could be forged to enact it in life. He wrote of a mirror book that punished not through fire, but through clarity. He was dismembered by his own order. His writings survive only in coded fragments sewn into cathedral vestments. Now, the symbols on the page begin to shift. They rearrange into a single sigil. It glows faintly, not bright, cold, like moonlight trapped under ice. You blink and the page blinks with you. The monk does not speak for several heartbeats, then barely a breath. The solstice does not pass, it hides, it waits. Each year it finds one reader, one like you. You stare at the sigil. You do not know it, but you will. It knows you already. The candle shrinks, not from time, but retreat. Even flame recoils from what is sung next. The monk's whisper stiffens, sharpened by old shame. You think scripture is only written? No, child. Some is breathed, some is sung. But this was never meant for lungs. Page 5 of the Codex bears a music staff, but twisted, ruptured, unaligned. Notes spill across the parchment like broken teeth. No clef, no key, only the suggestion of rhythm, and beside it an ink blot resembling a mouth, but with no lips. Only an empty oval, ringed with ridges like an insect's spiracle. The Nazi transcriber, a failed composer named Adler, described the page as auditory poison. When attempting to play it on a harmonium, he began convulsing after the 4th measure, bleeding from one ear and laughing through the other. His final words, recorded by a shaken medic, were, "They sang back. Oh God, they sang back." The Codex's music is not melody. It is not harmony. It is resonance. A liturgical echo composed not to glorify, but to open. The monk calls it a call of reversal, a hymn that hollows. A counter-psalm. This corrupted chant bears eerie similarities to an apocryphal 14th century monastic text titled Cantus Silentiarii, or the Song of the Silence Keepers. The book, only referenced in excommunication writs from the Carthusian order, was said to contain compositions designed to undo language, to reverse grammar, shred syntax, dissolve meaning. Those who heard it experienced speech loss, followed by identity leakage, the inability to distinguish one's thoughts from others. The last monastery known to house such a text sealed its bell tower with molten lead. No bells rang there. Again. The SS, unaware of this heritage, attempted to record the Codex's page 5 using wax cylinders and electromagnetic tape. All recordings failed. Some melted. Others reversed spontaneously, playing not the chant but the sound of mass breathing, hundreds of mouths inhaling together in a damp stone chamber. And then, one sharp exhale. The monk murmurs. They tried to orchestrate what should only have been endured. Fools. A ritual followed. Unnamed in Nazi files, but later reconstructed from fragmented documents, it involved 20 monks, prisoners from Dachau, ordered to read aloud the Codex's chant in unison. Not knowing Latin, not knowing why. The guards called it a test. The chamber was locked. For 8 hours, nothing happened. Then, the screaming. But not from pain. From joy. The kind of joy only known to the devoured. When the chamber was, opened, all 20 stood upright, eyes sewn shut with threads of white ash. Their mouths gaped. But no tongues remained. The Codex lay open before them. The page had turned itself. The phenomenon bears comparison to a 10th century Gnostic splinter cult known as the auriculari, or ear priests, who believed that the divine was not seen nor spoken, but heard through wounds. They mutilated their own mouths, then sang through throat vibrations alone, claiming to channel the voice of the first forgotten god, whose name was a void. One preserved skull from this sect bears engraved lines matching, impossibly, the exact staves on the Codex's 5th page, centuries before its discovery. What kind of song reaches backward? The monk leans close. You smell old ink and salted parchment. We heard it once, just once, and silence has never returned to us. Only the hollow. In the margins of page 5, a phrase flickers between visibility and vanishing, as if it knows it's being watched. Vox non tua est. The voice is not yours. That phrase appears again in another forbidden document, the silent charter of Saint Ouen, a 1267 parchment hidden beneath floorboards during a bishop's exorcism. The charter claimed that certain voices once heard become permanent occupants of the soul. They cannot be unlearned, not erased, only layered over by other noise or madness. The SS response to the failed ritual was swift and terrified. The Eider chamber was bricked shut. The Codex transferred under black cloth to a vault in northern Munich. But 3 weeks later, guards assigned to that vault began reporting strange side effects: tinnitus, unprovoked hymns, waking dreams of singing children in bone-white robes. They found one guard kneeling in the corridor, humming through a slit. He'd carved in his throat. The monk stops. Silence hangs, but it isn't empty. It listens. Then, barely a breath. Be careful now. If you hum what you see on this page, you will not be the one who finishes the song. The parchment ripples. The staff changes key. Your mouth tastes iron. You've tasted it now, haven't you? The monk doesn't ask. He declares, the sensation still lingers on your tongue. Dry, metallic, ancient. Not blood, not ink, but something funerary. Ashes, but not of wood. The candlelight dims, again as if to brace for what the next page must reveal. You feel it before it turns, a weight, not of guilt, of hunger. This page does not speak, it starves. The 6th folio opens to a portrait, etched in black blood lines. A figure kneels before a ruined altar. His ribs pierce through skin like thorns from a dying vine. His eyes are inkless hollows. His hands, cupped, and within them, ash. A note, scrawled beneath in ecclesiastical Greek, reads, O Agios tis Pinas, the saint of hunger. The Nazi occult department believed this figure to be Saint Emile of Colmar, a medieval anchorite whose writings were expunged by the Cistercian order for ritual desecration of relics. Emil's final epistle was said to describe a fast of 30 nights and a final meal made not for the stomach but for the soul. The letter ends with the chilling phrase, "I consumed the saints, and they consumed me." The Codex's depiction includes more than illustration. As you stare, faint dust sifts from the edge of the parchment, impossibly fine like cremation powder. You dare not breathe, but it enters you anyway. In early 1942, the SS stationed in Buchenwald intercepted a series of letters from a monk imprisoned for political sedition. These letters reference a book that feeds and describe a ritual wherein holy men would mix ground bone of martyrs with consecrated ash, then consume it in solitude, believing that ashes remember what flesh forgets. This ritual was known as communio cinereus, or the ash communion. It was performed only during eclipses, always alone, and never repeated. The monk's whisper falters now, not with weakness, with memory. I knew one who took it, just once. His mouth never closed again, not from pain, no, but from listening. He said the ash spoke back. This hunger, the one on the page, is not metaphor, not mysticism. It's biological. One Nazi experiment, since erased from all official record, involved feeding ground fragments of codex-bound parchment to terminal patients under the pretense of medicinal scripture. Results varied. Some died in silence, others screamed hymns. Backward, but one. One lived. He refused all food afterward. Ate only dust scraped from beneath the codex. He survived 29 days this way. On the 30th, he chanted 13 unknown syllables before collapsing. When dissected, his organs were found, filled with letters not carved, not inked, formed. The Codex, it seems, is capable of internal inscription. This has terrifying resonance with the forbidden theory of scriptural osmosis, the idea that sacred text, when consumed, does not simply enter the body, but writes new biology. A fringe Kabbalistic scholar, Yosef ben Imri, 1291, posited that the true Torah of angels is consumed, not read, and that which is consumed writes new flesh. His manuscripts were buried by his own students. None dared copy them. One of those fragments, however, bears the same sigil as the Codex's 6th page, an Ouroboros swallowing ashes, and the ash moves. You see it now, not drifting randomly but curling, forming letters? No, a sentence. You do not read it. It enters you. You do not eat alone. The margins pulse with a new phrase, only legible when viewed through breath fog on the page's surface. The phrase flickers, then steadies. Blessed are the hollow, for they shall be filled. This echoes a suppressed Beatitude translation, unearthed during a 19th century excavation of Syrian scrolls, a version considered apocryphal by both Catholic and Orthodox scholars. But the phrasing is exact. The SS response to this discovery was paradoxical. They quarantined the page, but not to destroy it, to replicate it. A unit of experimental monks under Nazi control called Orden der Leere, the Order of Emptiness, was tasked with copying the ritual through fasting, deprivation, and consumption of ritual ash. Only one survived. His teeth fell out. His, hair never returned. But when he whispered, walls wept. A single line from his final testimony survives. The Codex feeds us what the world forgot, until we forget the world. The monk's breath returns barely. Do not eat from this page, not even with your eyes. You try to turn the parchment, it resists. Not because it is stuck, because it is not finished with you. Symbols are not marks, the monk rasps. They are mouths that remember and bite. The next page opens with reluctance, not yours, but the page's. The parchment crinkles like old skin exposed to sudden light, though none is cast. What reveals itself is not a paragraph nor image. It is a diagram, clean lines at first glance, then curvature, then decay. A geometric pattern that somehow moves inward the longer you gaze, not toward a center, but toward a hunger. At the heart, a sigil. etched in something darker than ink. The Nazi archivist labeled this page as Tafel Schwarzblut 07, the Black Blood Table. It was removed from the Codex in early March 1942 for special examination by the Ahnenerbe's Occult Symbology Unit, led by Professor Karl-Heinz Rademacher. Rademacher was not a soldier, but a linguist and phrenologist obsessed with reclaiming what he called the sacred pre-Aryan script. He believed language had once belonged to gods and that the right shapes could call them back. What Rademacher discovered beneath the ink shocked even him. Infrared analysis revealed an underlayer of sigils drawn beneath the ones visible, older, cruder, but alive in form. These subsymbols, when overlaid on ancient Mesopotamian stellar maps, aligned exactly with constellations associated not with navigation, but with judgment. One of them, resembling an inverted thorn rune, flanked by mirrored sickles, matched a carving found on an unearthed Assyrian altar to Namtar, the god of plague and fate. That altar had been buried face down beneath a monastery in 812 AD. Coincidence? The Codex does not allow such comfort. Rademacher's final sketch of these sigils bore annotations in Old Norse, Akkadian, and glossolalia, a form of language written in trance, never repeated twice. In the margins he wrote, "They are not symbols, they are contracts." The monk inhales dryly. To draw a shape is to bleed a path, and once drawn, it will always be walked again. This reflects a forbidden belief from 5th century Zoroastrian mystics, the Devascriptions, who claimed demons were not summoned, but reawakened by tracing their original descent paths onto new material. Those paths, always circular, always recursive, sigils weren't signs. They were grooves, spiritual trenches that reality slides back into the moment they are seen. The SS, emboldened by these findings, began reproducing the Codex's sigils beneath official insignia. Swastikas etched over inverse trichetras, iron crosses overlaid with starless pentacles. None were shown to the public. These were marks for internal purification rites, carried out in abandoned churches with bricked windows and salt circles inscribed in chalk. Of the 39 men who participated in the first rite, 14 were later found with identical spiral scars behind their left ears, as if drawn from within, and worse, 3 began dreaming identical dreams, dreams of the mirror field, a black landscape, flat and endless, covered in chalk symbols. Above them, a sky where stars turned in reverse, pulling toward a central, blinking eye. Rademacher was eventually committed to an underground ward. He gouged his notes into his own arms with a sharpened piece of obsidian. When sedated, he whispered a phrase over and over, even in sleep. The sigil remembers. The sigil remembers. The sigil remembers. That same phrase appears in an 11th century alchemical grimoire, Liber Umbrae Signa, attributed to the Templar heretic Godric of Morlix. Godric warned of glyphs which once observed became permanent not in the mind, but in the soul's shape. He claimed that one such mark had followed him into death and back, altering his shadow to no longer resemble his form. The monk hisses, softly. I traced it once. Just one. My hand has never forgiven me. You glance at the page again, and now you see movement. The sigils are not fixed. They pulse ever so slightly, not like ink, like breath. One begins to spin. The monk's whisper stiffens to a cracked command. Look away, that one knows. You obey, but you've seen enough. On the bottom corner, a phrase appears only when read from the edge of vision, never directly, et vultum tum commodet, and it will eat your face. This phrase reappears in post-war reports concerning soldiers who handled Codex pages. 4 developed prosopagnosia, the inability to recognize faces, but not just of others, of themselves. They no longer identified their own reflections. 1 shattered every mirror in his house. 1 asked to be addressed only as Echo. 1 vanished entirely, leaving behind only a cracked pair of spectacles and a drawing of a sigil that matched the page you now dare not study again. The Q monk closes the page, but not before it leaves a faint outline on your hand. It doesn't burn. Yet. What's written on flesh cannot be burned, the monk murmurs, not in metaphor but law. The page trembles in his hands, as if resisting daylight it has never known. What is revealed now is not a diagram, nor chant, nor symbol, but memory. Not written in letters, but in bodies. The parchment opens to reveal an illustration. 7 figures kneel around a fire, not to warm themselves, but to be branded. Each figure bears strips of flayed skin hanging from their backs like tattered banners. On these strips, writing, not in ink, in scar tissue. This is the record of the Black Citadel. The Nazi term for it was Archiv ohne Fenster, the archive without windows. But among those who whispered its legend in lost seminaries and ash-colored cells, it was simply called the Keep of Backs. A monastery, perhaps. A prison, certainly. Location, unknown. Its scribes, forbidden monks who did not transcribe upon scroll or parchment but into their own bodies. The Codex's 8th folio documents their existence not through text but impression. A sheet pressed from something soft once carved with blades, this page is not read, it is touched. And as your fingers graze it, you feel the raised ridges of glyphs that once lived on skin. It is a tactile script, designed for blind priests. The monk exhales slowly. We were taught that sight is a luxury truth cannot afford, that to know the divine one must be scarred by it. In 1942, Himmler dispatched a unit under the Geheime Sonderarchivgruppe der Ruthind to investigate the validity of the Keep of Backs after decoding mentions in a confiscated Romanian text, De Carne Veritas, from Flesh Truth. The book described a sect that abandoned all writing tools after a revelation that ink could lie, but pain could not. The Nazi team, led by occult ethnographer Dr. Reinhard Vogel, followed these clues to a sealed crypt beneath the ruins of the fortress at Poenari, Romania. There, they unearthed 13 bodies, perfectly preserved. Not mummified, preserved by ritual. Each body's back had been flayed and carefully folded over their ribs, creating a book of ribs. Each strip bore symbols in a language never before seen, twisting curves that mimicked tendons, loops that resembled vertebrae. The most complete back scroll, when stretched and photographed, displayed a phrase in overlaid patterns. Lex incisa, non scripta. Law must be carved, not written. Dr. Vogel attempted to translate the language using a synthesis of Proto-Canaanite and medieval Glagolitic script. His progress halted after 2 weeks, when he was found naked in his office, surrounded by hundreds of meticulously drawn glyphs tattooed into his own chest. His mouth had been sewn shut, not by thread, by words. The ink matched that of the Codex. Here the monk sighs, and for a moment you hear dozens of breaths exhale with him, as if each reader before you joins the lament. There is a ritual described in Codex Folio 8 known as Corpus Scriptorium. It instructs the reader to copy a passage, not onto paper, but into the flesh of a willing vessel. The flesh must not be anesthetized. The subject must chant each word as it is carved. Once complete, the wound becomes a living scripture, and the vessel begins to speak in voices not their own. This ritual was reportedly attempted once by a group of desperate Nazi mystics in Austria, seeking to preserve the Codex through human mediums after rumors of Allied destruction. Of the 6 vessels used, 5 perished. The 6th survived, but only spoke in reverse Aramaic. His skin was preserved. It hangs today, unlabeled, in an anonymous vault in the Bavarian National Library, rumored to be one of the so-called unseen. Holdings. A theological fragment from the Council of Soissons, 1092, long thought apocryphal, refers obliquely to such practices. Let not the word be housed in rot, lest the rot begin to speak it. This may explain why no monastery ever officially recorded flesh scripture, but all feared it. The margins of this page react to touch. Your finger, as it brushes a particular ridge, causes the parchment to warm. A faint glow spreads outward, revealing hidden text only visible through warmth. I remember the hand that carved me, and beneath that one line appears in ink so faint it may be blood drawn centuries ago. Your back has not yet spoken. The monk does not whisper now. He waits, because some pages read you. The monk says nothing at first. He lets the silence press in, as if testing your breath for tremors, testing your soul for cracks. Now, the book begins to open you. Page 9 reveals nothing at first glance. It is blank, not aged or faded, pristine, too pristine. The kind of blankness that isn't absence, but camouflage. Then, as your eyes adjust, as the candle flickers and your breath fogs the page, you see lines, not drawn on the parchment, but within it, like veins, like scarred memory. The Codex has changed its method. You feel it before you know it. The shift. You are no longer reading the book. The book is reading you. Nazi archivists documented this change in March 1942, when Obersturmführer Elias Brecht attempted to transcribe this very page. Brecht, once a gifted graphologist, wrote fluently, in 6 languages, and was known for deciphering ciphers under duress. But when handed the Codex on the 9th page, he did not transcribe the symbols. He wrote down a childhood memory instead, watching his mother drown in the ice lake of Carrington when he was 6, then another memory, and another. Rapid, frantic, none related, all precise. The monk whispers with reluctant reverence, "This is the memory ink page. It does not hold text. It draws yours." After 3 hours, Brecht had written over 60 pages, all autobiographical. Yet when questioned later, he remembered none of them. His colleagues, too, forgot what they had read. The writing faded from the paper within a day. Only one line remained. "You were always in the book." This aligns with the forgotten theories of 14th century mystic Sebastiano del Mare, who proposed the existence of inverse scripture, sacred texts that exist only while being remembered, and erase themselves once the reader forgets. Del Mare claimed to possess such a book, a leather-bound nothing that changed each time it was opened. He wrote, "It has no pages until I open my mind. Then it writes what I fear." His manuscript was burned, or so it was said. The Codex had absorbed Brecht, but he was not the first. The monk shivers. It learns you, not just your memories, your syntax, the grammar of your being. In a forbidden side note buried in a defector's SS diary, there is mention of linguistische Umsturz, or linguistic inversion syndrome, a condition wherein a reader of the Codex begins to reorder not just sentences but thoughts, until identity disintegrates, pronouns dissolve, chronology collapses. Some readers refer to themselves as we, others as you. A few never speak again, believing their voice has been transferred. A report from April 1942 confirms the most chilling case. An interpreter, Frau Anneke Weil, fluent in Hebrew and ancient Greek, was found in her quarters covered in writing. Not ink, scars. Her skin had begun to display phrases from the Codex without any carving tools present. She had not touched the book directly. She had only stood near the page while it was read aloud. The phrases on her body matched a passage from an extinct Sogdian dialect dead for 800 years. The Codex does not need to be read. It needs only a listener. A fringe theological belief emerging from Nestorian Christian exile suggests a similar phenomenon, lex insinuata, the insinuated word. This was the idea that some divine texts act not as message, but as mirror, and that the true scripture is the reflection of the reader's guilt upon the page. In this view, the holiest book is the one that destroys its own language and replaces it with you. A note from a dying monk in Salzburg, recorded in pencil on crumbling vellum, reinforces this. "I opened it and saw my mother's breath, my father's silence, the child I never became. Then it wrote this hand, and now this hand writes me." The Codex's 9th page has no fixed content. But once touched, it leaves a trace on the reader, linguistic drift. You may have already noticed it. Pronouns slipping, sentence rhythms curving, thoughts looping. It's not error, it's editing. The monk speaks now in broken cadence, It rewrites slowly. First your tongue, then your thought, then your name. It wants you legible. In the bottom right corner of the page, new text begins to appear. You are certain it was not there before. It reads, "You have made it this far. Your ink has good taste." Below that, in smaller letters, "What shall we write you as?" The page begins to ripple. The candle flares, and you feel a question, not asked but installed. It is not, "Do you understand?" It is, "Who are you now?" The page waits, so does the book. It is not the book that shifts, the monk murmurs, voice distant, brittle. It is your reflection that no longer fits its frame. The 10th page reveals no words, no ink, no symbol, just a perfect reflective gloss across the parchment surface. You expect glass, but this is something stranger, flexible, cold, and faintly rippling. A mirror not of silver and sand, but of processed light trapped in skin. The Codex page acts as a mirror, but not one that shows your face. When Nazi researchers first reached this section, they believed it was blank. Under lamplight, it showed nothing, but under candlelight, as per medieval ritual practice, the surface began to respond. Not immediately, only after breath, after gaze. The reflection shifted, slowly becoming a space, not an image, depth where none should exist. SS officer Jürgen Felt described the first manifestation. A room appeared in the page, familiar, but wrong. Like a version of my childhood bedroom that never stopped grieving me. Others described different scenes. A monastery cloaked in black feathers. A well with no bottom, echoing laughter in reverse. A cathedral with walls that bled. Gold dust. No two saw the same. Yet all insisted that something was watching them back. Not a figure, not even a shape. A presence. Like breath fogging the inside of their skulls. The monk whispers reverently. They prayed to their own reflections. They did not know the mirror prayed louder. What followed was not vision, but contamination. Felt reported mirror anomalies, appearing in the facility's bathrooms, windows, even pools of water. Reflections moved differently, delayed, or too fast. Some never showed up at all. One guard saw himself blink in the mirror before he did in life. Another saw a mouth open behind him, though he stood alone. This aligns with the forgotten doctrine of the imago mortua, the dead image, a belief held by esoteric sects in 10th century Armenia that mirrors were once alive, and each reflection stolen is a temporary lease of the soul. That lease, they claimed, could be extended or reclaimed through ritual. A fringe ritual, known as specular adoratio, is briefly referenced in an anonymous 1623 Jesuit letter banned by 4 separate popes. It involves kneeling before a reflective surface lit only by flame, reciting the tenebrae inversa, inverted psalms, until the reflection begins to move on its own. If the participant continues, it is said, their reflection will not vanish, but separate. What remains in the mirror is no longer bound to mimicry. It becomes curious. The monk speaks with unusual sorrow. We let them through once. Only once. They do not lie. But they do pray. Not to gods, to each other. About us. The SS's notes grow increasingly erratic after exposure to the Codex's mirrored page. Test subjects began to refuse mirrors, then avoid even their shadows. Some tried to gouge out their eyes, not from madness, but from shame. One account, buried in the notes of occult supervisor Greta Vall, records the case of Sergeant Lawrence. He was found kneeling in the candle-lit corridor outside the vault. Surrounding him, 17 mirrors, all facing inward. He had arranged them in a ring, placed the Codex at the center, and sat cross-legged before it, weeping silently. When questioned, he said only, "They won't leave until I become more interesting." The mirrors were confiscated. One cracked during transport. Inside the crack, beneath the surface, A face was seen, not Lawrence's, not human, just a mouth. Open, waiting. Post-war documentation links this phenomenon to another theological curiosity, the silent hourglass of Kumis, a Persian artifact described in a 9th century chronicle. It was said to reflect the last thing you would ever see, but only when observed at twilight. The object was lost during Mongol invasions, but descriptions of the reversed watching closely mirror the Codex's 10th page behavior. The margins of the Codex begin to ripple as you stare. You don't remember leaning in. The parchment reflects not your face, but something else. A version of you, perhaps, or a reader yet to be. This reflection opens its mouth. You do not hear a voice. You feel a shape in your thoughts, something syllabic. It aches. It wants to be said. The monk's whisper becomes sharp. Say nothing. It is not yours. The parchment fogs, then clears. Now, at the very bottom of the page, only visible at a particular tilt, is a line etched, so faintly it may not exist. Prayer is a mirror, and you just knelt. The page shifts as the mirror dies, replaced once more by dry, brittle fiber, but the sense of watching does not leave. You are no longer sure if it ever did. Not all sermons end in Amen. The monk breathes, the words dragging like iron across a chapel floor. This page smells different. Moustier, like old incense, and wet parchment, the scent of something long buried beneath the mold of forgotten sanctuaries. When the monk turns the page, even the flame recoils. The edge is singed, as if this folio once burned, or attempted to. At the top, scorched but legible, is a title in Latin, Sermo Ultimus, Ex Cathedra Oblivionis. The final sermon, from the chair of forgetting. The 11th folio contains a homily in a single block of tightly written text in ecclesiastical Latin, with abrupt Greek insertions and 2 phrases in something unidentifiable, curling glyphs that do not belong to any alphabet recognized by the Vatican or by scholars who survived. Reading it. The sermon is dated 1244 AD. The location, Worms, a city in the Holy Roman Empire, but there is no record of such a sermon ever being delivered there. And yet, the cathedral in Worms does hold a grim secret. A sealed vault beneath its sacristy, uncovered during repairs in 1943 by Nazi religious archivists. Inside they found ashes, bones, a pulpit carved with an open mouth instead of a cross, and, most damning of all, a partially preserved manuscript matching the Codex's handwriting exactly. The monk's voice tightens. He preached, not to save, not to warn, but to erase. According to the notes recovered by the Nazis, the upper preacher, unnamed in the Codex, stood before a congregation of monks and townsfolk. He wore no vestments. His skin was blackened with soot, and his voice was described as a choir made of only whispers. The sermon had no structure. It was not teaching, it was unteaching. Listeners wept without understanding why. One wrote in their journal, "I forgot the names of my sons while he spoke, and I wept not because they were gone, but because they were never mine." The Codex preserves the sermon in fragments, like a broken bell echoing itself through stone. Scholars have attempted translation, but every full rendering dissolves into semantic nonsense, syntax loops, inverted metaphors, and recursive pronouns. One translated fragment reads, "In the beginning was the forgetting, and the forgetting was with God, and the forgetting was God." This blasphemy echoes a long-buried heresy from the 6th century Alexandrian sect called the Unnamed Brethren, who claimed that memory was the serpent of Eden, and that salvation came not from knowledge, but divine unknowing. They sought erasure of self, chanting psalms backward until they could no longer recall their own speech. Their scrolls were buried in a salted pit beneath Mount Sinai. All but one, the one now copied into the Codex. The sermon continues with references to the book that speaks your name before you are born, and describes a ritual called the Dominus, subterraneous, the Lord beneath. It was not a god. Not even a demon, but a voice-shaped absence that feeds on remembrance, drawn forth by those who attempt to preserve too much truth. Here, the Codex breaks tradition. It includes a warning in the preacher's own voice, scribbled sideways along the margin. If you hear the end of this sermon, your lineage ends with you. When the SS tried to broadcast the recorded translation through phonograph as a psychological weapon, the transmission failed. All speakers emitted a reversed echo that killed every insect within a 20-meter radius. One listener began to babble in Enochian, despite no prior knowledge of the tongue. He gouged out his ears and wrote, "He preaches still." Another historical fragment adds weight to this terror. A scholar named Miklos Kaldi in 1812 transcribed a dream in which a sermon made ink drip upward from the page. He believed he had received a cursed echo from worms. His only surviving work ends mid-sentence, and when he lifted the book, the pews began to breathe. The monk trembles as he reads the final line on the page, not aloud but inside you. You feel the words, heavy as lead, forming in the space behind your thoughts. If you remember this sermon, it is already rewriting your faith, and indeed you do remember it, even as the words fade, even as the candle sputters, because forgetting was never an option, not with this book. There are rites for salt and smoke. The monk rasps, his voice quieter now. But no rite for what lives between the pages. The 12th folio is scorched on one edge, brittle and blackened, as if it had once been forced too close to fire. Yet it still lives. Beneath the damage, you see a narrow column of handwritten text, Latin mixed with Hebrew, spliced with unfamiliar sigils that look as though they were written in panic. The ink has run in places, but not from water, from weeping. At the top of the page, barely legible, is a phrase stamped in rust-colored wax, Expulsio Impossibilis, Dachau, Merz, 1943. This is the account of the only known exorcism attempted upon the Codex. The monk does not sigh this time. He pauses then. They tried to sanctify a scream. Records from the Dachau concentration camp rarely include anything beyond horror, but buried deep in the surviving archives, a file labeled Religionsabteilung D reveals the involvement of a French Jesuit priest, Father Adrien Vallon, captured during a raid in Lyon. Vallon, known among the clergy for his obsession with esoteric rituals and banned sacramentals, was forced into service by SS occult researchers seeking to neutralize the Codex, which by then had begun affecting guards' dreams, altering compass readings, and corrupting audio transmissions with whispers in extinct dialects. Vallon agreed on one condition: he would conduct the ritual alone. The room was a converted storeroom in Block 17. A stone table, salt rings, a silver cross forged from confiscated prisoner possessions. 3 relics were brought in: a splinter from the true cross, authenticity unverified, a flask of holy water from Lourdes, and a copy of Psalm 91 handwritten by a child who had survived typhus. Vallon insisted on one more object, a blindfold. The Codex was placed before him, open to an unnamed page that had begun changing position on its own. A transcript survives, incomplete, written by an SS linguist named Graeber, who watched through a slotted door. He described what followed as a prayer made of wire and ash. Vallon did not speak the exorcism. He screamed it, each word rising from him like something extracted. Graeber noted the Latin turned backward midway, and his voice shifted in register, at times echoing like a choir, at times like 2 people speaking through one mouth. Halfway through, the candle at the center of the circle turned black. Not the flame, the light itself. Shadows lengthened upward, and then silence. What came next is not described, because Graeber stopped writing, because the next page of his notes is blank. Only one sentence appears at the bottom, added later in trembling pencil: "The exorcist has been exorcised." When the guards opened the door, they found only Father Vallon's robes neatly folded beside the still open Codex. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no noise. But above the robes, burned into the stone table, was a single word in Aramaic. Azazel. Azazel, the scapegoat of Leviticus, the wanderer into wilderness, but older than the text too, older than expulsion, older, even, than blame. The relics had vanished, the salt had melted, and on the far wall, etched in something darker than soot, was a sigil later matched to cave markings found in the Acton Tunicul Muknal ritual chambers of Belize, a symbol that predated Christ by over 3 millennia. The theological implications broke minds. A Dominican scholar later wrote in secret correspondence, "What they summoned was not a demon, not a devil, but the memory of a failed exorcism from before time was recorded." The Codex did not close after that night. It turned a page on its own, and what it showed next was a mirror, not of silver but of salt, the outline of a face screaming in silence. The margins of the 12th folio have since been examined and found to contain particles of iron oxide consistent with blood, yet no one ever recalls seeing blood spilled. It seems to appear when the page is read aloud. A residual wound, an echo of failure. The monk's voice cracks here. We told them, "You cannot banish what you have already invited to teach." You feel it now. The air around you is heavier, as if the room remembers something you do not, as if a ritual long forgotten still lingers, waiting to finish its final syllable. Beneath the paragraph, a line appears slowly. You do not see it form. You see it return. There is no exorcism for memory, and just below that, he did not cast the spirit out. He gave it a name. The flame does not flicker. It bows. You will not hear it when waking, the monk whispers now, almost apologetically. That mercy is reserved only for the day. But when the eyes shut, oh child, the page opens wider. The 13th folio is unlike the others. No visible writing, no illustration, only a raised texture, like Braille, but not composed of dots. These are ridges, uneven and pulsing slightly under the touch, and if you press too long, the paper hums. Not aloud. Inside your skull, Nazi observers assigned to monitor the Codex overnight during its 1943 transport began suffering from what was first classified as vocal parasomnia. They muttered in sleep, groaned, eventually moaned sequences of syllables that defied phonetics, sounds that slipped between languages like eels. One soldier, Hans Guttmacher, was recorded saying the same 4 words every night at 3:06 a.m. Don't read the scream yet. The monk breathes carefully, deliberately. Not all texts are spoken with tongues, some with the breath that slips between ribs when the heart forgets to beat. What followed among the observers was more disturbing. Synchronized dreaming. Subjects reported dreaming identical environments. Stone rooms with no doors, vaulted, corridors full of whispering roots, and pages growing from the ceiling like fungus. In each dream, a sound would begin. Not a voice, not a cry, a scream without a mouth. No one ever described the full sound. Not because they couldn't, because they refused. Many would wake with blood trailing from the ears or eyes. One sergeant bit off the tip of his own tongue, just to stop speaking in sleep. This effect has a distant echo in an 8th century Egyptian Coptic scroll describing the Bibliotheca Insomnium, the library of sleep. According to fragmentary sources, the library contained books only openable in dreams and could not be accessed willingly. One entered only when one read too deeply while conscious. The scroll warned that the texts heard in sleep feed on breath. They do not stay behind when waking. The Codex's 13th page matches this phenomenon exactly. Over a series of nights, readers began to dream in script. Letters would form in the air, glowing, but when spoken aloud upon waking, they had effect. Small ones at first, cracked glass, shifting lights. But later, silence where voices should have been, entire corridors in the bunker where no one could speak without vomiting ash. The monk's voice trembles, not with fear but reverence. That page contains the first scream, the one God heard before creation. The one he did not answer, NEA. Internal SS report, handwritten and unsigned, recounts a final experiment. A soldier was sedated and the 13th page placed beneath his pillow. Electroencephalogram readings began to spike at irregular intervals. The soldier's lips moved, though he did not breathe. A phonograph recorded his voice saying a single phrase, "Turn me before I turn you." Moments later, the soldier awoke screaming, but it was not his scream. His voice had dropped 2 octaves. Witnesses described it as a woman dying and laughing at the same time. The sound caused 4 bulbs to burst. 2 men bled from the nose. The soldier died, not from trauma, but asphyxiation, though no blockages were found in his airway. His lungs, however, were full of ink chemically matched to the Codex. There is an ancient heretical belief circulating in 1st century Anatolia that certain sacred books did not originate on Earth but fell from elsewhere. These katabiblia, down books, carried language not meant to be spoken by flesh. Reading them aloud, even in sleep, triggered what early mystics called the unvoicing, the erasure of identity via sound. One such case is preserved in a Byzantine marginalia annotation. A monk spoke in dream letters. His own name bled from his mouth. He no longer responds to it. You notice now that your own breath has synced to the rhythm of the Codex's ridges. A pattern. 4 beats, pause. 3 breaths, silence. It is calling a name, but it is not yours. Yet, in the very edge of the folio, visible only when viewed through reflection, perhaps in water, perhaps in the eye, a faint line is etched. We scream you back into silence, and, just below, you are almost legible now. The monk no longer turns the page with his hand. The page turns itself, and the scream, you hear it now, is not sound. It is recognition. Your tongue feels different now, doesn't it? The monk hisses, his voice curled like smoke around a blade. Heavier. It remembers sounds you never learned, syllables your ancestors chewed before they learned to lie. The 14th. Folio is deceptively small, compressed, ink densely packed as if trying to smother itself beneath the lines. You lean in, and the writing stings the eyes. Not visually, but neurologically, as if reading it reshapes how your brain folds around meaning. The language on this page is unknown, not in the sense of unfamiliarity, but in the sense of evasion. Every time you blink, the sentence structure shifts. Nouns slide into verbs. Subjects vanish. Syntax unwinds, rewinds, realigns. You cannot read it twice the same way. This is the recursive tongue. The Nazis never decoded this page, not because they lacked scholars, but because they couldn't survive the process. Every linguist assigned to it developed lexical instability, a psycholinguistic phenomenon in which words began to betray their definitions. Objects became names, names became imperatives, sentences infected dreams. The monk whispers as if through a split in the veil. This is the page that does not want to be read. It wants to be released. One SS experiment tried exposing the page to an artificial intelligence apparatus, primitive for its time, essentially a series of logical matrices meant to parse language rules. Within 47 minutes, the system began generating nonsense symbols. Then it created its own language. Then a name, Yun Ra Sef, which according to no existing tongue means nothing, except the same sequence of sounds appears once in a 12th century manuscript from Cordoba, in a passage describing the hunger beneath vowels. The same passage was found carved into the wall of a burned-down seminary in 1853, in reverse. The Codex is not content with being read. It responds. This is the central horror of the 14th page, that it is not inert. It does not transmit, it transacts. Every attempt to speak it aloud results in spoken recursion. One soldier who attempted phonetic pronunciation was caught speaking to himself from behind, despite standing alone in a locked chamber. When interrogated, he said, The book is not teaching me a language, it is teaching me how to be taught. This mirrors a lost doctrine from the Gnostic splinter sect known as the eclecticoi pneumaton, the choosers of breath. They believed that the divine had once spoken the world into being, and that human language was an infection, a lingering fragment of that breath broken and made flesh. To speak truly, one had to rejoin the breath at its source, but doing so would undo the speaker. The Codex's response to this heresy is subtle. It begins writing you. In the blank margins of the 14th page, new words form, slowly, like condensation on a window. They mimic your thoughts. They echo, fragments you did not say aloud. You see hints of things you once forgot, now written in a language you somehow understand. One line flashes like a pulse. To read is to feed. To speak is to bleed. Another appears below. You are no longer the reader. You are the scroll. SS linguists began to develop facial tics, compulsive muttering, and a behavior now classified by forbidden researchers as glossa inversa, inverted speech syndrome. Patients began uttering palindromes involuntarily, then syllables that reversed mid-vocalization, creating impossible loops of speech. These utterances, when recorded and played backward, matched known fragments from dead languages, including two that had never been written down. The monk coughs. It is not blood. It is ink. I once spoke from this page. I do not remember what I said, only that someone else still does. Somewhere. In a mirror. In a mouth not mine. There is a ritual, described only once in a torn codex found near a ruined abbey in Hildesheim, called oratio mutua, the mutual prayer. It involves two speakers reciting an unknown language in perfect mirror synchrony. If done correctly, one becomes unbound by time, the other by self. The last to attempt it bit off his own ear halfway through. The Codex bears its own mirror script of this ritual, but reversed, read not by eye but by tongue. The ink is not absorbed, it tastes. You feel it now. It's tasting you. At the bottom of the page, appearing only after a moment of doubt, only after you question whether you still understand what words are, comes a single crystalline line, etched in what may be your own handwriting. Speak me, and I will become you. The monk does not close the page. He lets it linger, because you have already said the first syllable, in your mind. The book has no ending. The monk breathes, brittle and burnt, but someone must always close it, or try. The 15th and final folio bears the marks of hands, not drawn, not printed, but pressed. Palm-shaped stains, discolored and dark, bloom across the page like the bruises of memory. Beneath them, a simple line. He who turned this page last is still within it. This is the tale of the monk who sealed the Codex. His name is never given, not in this page, nor in any document. But the Codex refers to him only as Custos Terminus, the keeper of the end. He appears nowhere in church records, but fragments of his presence trail behind like a broken chain. A signature carved into the underside of a cathedral's crypt beam in Toledo. A note tucked into a flayed scroll recovered from a Baltic bog. A bloodless fingerprint on the inside of an iron mask, locked since 1313. The monk sighs. He was one of us, not born, written, chosen not for faith but for fracture. He had nothing to lose. In 1944, as the war frayed at its edges and the Nazis began to devour their own tail, the Codex was moved again. This time, not by order, but by terror. Too many voices, too many vanishings. It was said the book no longer waited to be opened. It opened itself. It turned pages in darkness. It spoke when alone. And so someone had to be summoned. Not a priest, not a soldier, a monk from the Pyrenean ruins. From a monastery that did not appear on maps, brought in blindfolded, bound not by rope, but by vow. His arrival was not announced. The guards who transported him do not appear in any roster. Only a broken rosary in the record vault remains. What happened in that chamber was not recorded, but the results remain etched, literally, into the Codex itself. This final folio bears scars of the sealing ritual, 5 punctures, as if nailed. A single hair, woven through a glyph that resembles both a cross and a knot. And, most chilling, a circle of teeth pressed into the corner, human but unnaturally arranged, forming a closed ring. DNA later matched the teeth to 7 different individuals, none accounted for. The sealing ritual was known only to one school, the Acolytes of Null Inc., a forbidden order that believed the only true text was silence written deeply enough to endure time. Their creed: to read is to speak, to seal is to become unreadable. The monk performed the ritual with his own body, not sacrifice substitution. He did not banish the Codex, he entered it. The final act required inscription into self, a reverse stigmata. Glyphs cut into flesh with no blade. Words not spoken aloud, but held between the ribs. It is said he whispered the null benediction as he passed between worlds. Let no breath follow me. Let no name recall me. I am the ink that does not dry. After that, the Codex ceased changing. For a time, it slept, sealed quiet until Berlin fell, until the vault cracked under rubble, until the dust of empire stirred and one curious hand pulled back a black cloth, and once more, it turned the page. The monk now before you, the one who has whispered every word, he is not the Custos Terminus, but he remembers him, because the sealing was not perfect. Nothing in this book ever is. One line remains at the bottom of the 15th folio. It shifts as you read it. It listens. Who will seal it this time? Your candle flickers. Not from wind, from breath behind you, and the monk falls silent. Not from fatigue, but because you have reached the edge. There is no next page, only the back of the book, where the cover waits. But even covers can open. There are no endings in the Codex, only interruptions. What you have read has entered you, not metaphorically. The words settle like sediment along the folds of your thought. Your syntax has shifted. Your breath has changed pace. You no longer think in silence. You think in whispers. You will dream differently now. You will read faces as if they are paragraphs. You will find yourself speaking the first syllable of something no one else hears. A language that bites, that responds. And one night when the room is quiet, when the mirror forgets to show you, you will hear a voice beneath your own. It will say, "You are almost ready." And then perhaps you will turn the page again. If your candle hasn't gone out yet, you might be ready for the next book.